I'm Ian Stevens, and I'm going to share just a few words to kick us off on why we set up this project and to set out how this session is going to run. And we're delighted to have Chris and Manny joining us to share after me. So I'll just say a couple of words about Teacher Tapp and school surveys to start. Teacher Tapp, many of you will know, it's a free app for anyone in education, aimed at people working in schools to do daily surveys of just 3 questions, very quick to do, answering questions on a whole range of different issues of what's going on in schools. School surveys is our paid for surveying service for schools to do their own surveying of their staff, their pupils and their parents. And what unites Teacher Tapp and school surveys is a vision for better decisions being made in education because of hearing accurately from voices on the ground. That's what we're really passionate about. So why lunchtimes and why Lunchtime Listen? So we ask regularly on the Teacher Tapp app what causes stress or concern to people working in schools. And for quite some time now, the top answer has been behaviour. And one question pointed to lunchtimes in particular. We found that consistently people are saying lunchtime behaviour is a real challenge. And we've been asking quite a lot of different interesting questions to teachers about lunchtimes. So, for example, we've asked if they've spent lesson time resolving lunchtime issues, and 55% say yes. We've been asking about how long pupils have for their lunchtime. We're not the only ones interested in this. Some of you might have seen recent research published also marking a real decline in length of time for lunchtime. So this is something that's going on out there. We've asked lots of other things. For example, we found out that 87% of our teachers say they've seen pupil knowledge of playground games declining. We've asked them about equipment, which seems to be declining as well. So we're very interested in lots of different things to do with lunchtimes. We know that lots of people care about this from so many different angles. There's the mental health, the physical health, the length of the lunchtimes, the food that's being offered, children's sense of belonging. We're hearing that word a lot at the moment in schools, attendance, and of course, behaviour, the impact that this can have on behaviour for the rest of the afternoon. So there's so many different sort of interesting angles to this. What we thought we'd love to do was hear from the pupils. So this half of term, we've been running the Lunchtime Listen, which has been a sort of national surveying window. We've invited all schools to join free with this and ask their pupils about their experiences and views of their lunchtime. So we created some templates for people to use on the school surveys platform. And another version for younger children. So we've got 2 different templates out there, and we will be finishing the surveying window this Friday with the end of term for most schools and collating all those interesting findings. Individual schools will get their own reports back of benchmarked answers, and then we're going to look at across the piece what themes are emerging, what have we learnt, and share a national report at the start of May. So this afternoon is about hearing from some of those voices on the front line, some people who are doing work with schools or in schools and have got things to share about lunchtimes and what might make them better. So we're really, really delighted to have, first of all, Chris Wright is going to share with us from the Youth Sport Trust. They do some fabulous work in schools, helping them think about this. He's their Head of Wellbeing and Health, I believe. Is that right, Chris? And so I'm going to hand over to him. And after he's shared, we're also delighted that we're going to be hearing from Manny, who is Manny Botwe's head teacher in Tytherington School. We did hope to have Peter Hunt joining us from Oasis, but he sadly couldn't join us. But Chris knows all about what he was going to be sharing, so Chris is going to share on Peter's behalf. So I think that's quite enough from me. I'm going to stop presenting and hand over to Chris, who's going to take the reins and present from his side from the Youth Sport Trust.
Thank you very much, June. And apologies that Peter can't be with us this afternoon, but as you all very well know, working in education in schools at the moment, these things tend to crop up, and he's been dragged away to a parent and governors meeting. But he has provided me with his slide deck, and I'll do my very best to bring to life the amazing work that's been happening at Oasis Blakenhale. Just to start off, for those of you who don't know, that we are a children's charity. We are based in Loughborough and we work across the UK, and our mantra is that we want to affect the childhood experiences that we have in today's society through the lens of how we can improve children's health, happiness and sense of identity. At the moment we are living in a chaotic society where we have children that are operating in a world where there are various pressures and strains and stresses on them, and we're creating an environment where they're not thriving. The reality for our young people at the moment, and what I want to explore just for the next sort of 15 minutes, is how we can improve children's sense of health and happiness through the physical activity experience that they receive in school, and look to see what's within the gift of our education system that can affect that positively. What we're seeing is some of the unhappiest and healthiest children in Western Europe, and the PISA data, whilst it paints a fantastic picture about how children are achieving academically, when you look at things like their life satisfaction and their mental health, we're actually at the bottom of those tables. And yet what we do know is that within education and around education, including with parents, that what we need to be doing here is creating children that have a happy, healthy sense of themselves, sense of belonging and sense of purpose. And I think there's some amazing things that we can do excuse me, within our education system, but also through the vehicle of sport and physical activity. What we do know is that you're all grappling with the accountability measures that we all operate within, and that what we're seeing in evidence is that if children are unhappy and unhealthy, that they don't learn. And some of that comes down to the environment that we create in schools. And so when we're seeing these pinch points, both in lunchtimes and break times and throughout the day, where children are physically and emotionally unregulated with the environment around them, we're seeing that they are creating essentially barriers to their learning, to their achievement and their potential in life. And ultimately what we're here for, I believe, or we believe, is that we want to create happy, healthy citizens of the future. Apologies for just bouncing around for a second, but I just wanted to show you a quick video clip, if that's okay.
I didn't know what freedom was until it was taken from me. It's devastating. I've had who I am inside stripped away. You can never escape the walls. You can never escape your mind. Then imagine they open your door. You have time to walk out that door and feel the sun on your face. It's everything to me.
My daily outdoors time, I think that's probably the most important part of my day.
Take all the frustrations and all your problems and just leave them out there.
Keeps my mind right, keeps my body strong.
It's pretty much the highlight of my day.
So, how would you feel if your yard time was reduced to just 1 hour a day?
Yeah. What am I supposed to tell you how I feel about that?
I'm gonna feel pretty sad about it.
I think that's gonna build more anger, it's not gonna be a good thing.
Would be torture.
I think cutting the offender's outside time to an hour a day is potentially disastrous.
Well, do you know who does have only 1 hour outdoors per day? Children.
Wow.
That's depressing. I don't even know what to say to that.
Something has gone very wrong.
Even as I sit in here and as a prisoner, I mean, yeah, that's not good.
If you don't have to throw the kids in the bathtub, they haven't played hard enough.
Climb a tree, break a leg. You know, that's part of life.
Learn to be a kid.
So, if you could have one wish, what would it be?
I wish I could take my kid to a park today.
Apologies, just bouncing around again. There we go. So what we know from evidence is that essentially we are still Neanderthal human beings, and that children thrive best when they are playing, when they're moving, when they're outdoors, and ironically enough, when they're with other children and hungry. But when we're removing these conditions, what we're doing essentially is creating an environment where their behaviour will match the conditions that we set out for them. We've lost 45,000 hours of physical education since 2012, and as June's presented there, we have children who have less than an hour outdoors during the school day. And therefore what we're seeing is two things. One is that there is a pent-up physical and emotional regulation issue here that is manifesting itself in those break times throughout the day. And equally, we're seeing children's access to the outdoors and a moment when they can expend that energy and physically and emotionally re-regulate being taken away from them. When we were doing some work with some primary schools as part of our State of the Nation report, these were some of the things that practitioners were coming back with, and is, I think, represented in some of the feedback that you've given Teacher Tapp on some of the issues that you're trying to address throughout the school day with children, particularly their behaviour, their regulation and their attention. And there's something really positive that we can do, particularly at lunchtimes, to enable children to physically and emotionally regulate. The evidence suggests that also physical activity is a great learning tool. So it's a great strategy for how you improve children's attention and engagement with learning throughout the day, but equally how it helps with their mood and with their mental state, and indeed with their neuroplasticity, so their cognition is of benefit even when they're moving from sitting to standing, and when they're going through to being active through light activity, as well as for health benefit being maximised through being moderate to vigorously active when we're hot and sweaty and we're slightly out of breath. And this is what it looks like from a whole school perspective. And I think what we're recommending here is that whilst being active at lunchtime is really, really important moments in time for children and young people in your school, there are other aspects of the school day that you can look at in order to make sure that there is a movement culture and lots of opportunities to move throughout the school day, whether it's from how they get to and from school, in between lessons or in lessons themselves, particularly in lessons where they're sitting down for a prolonged period of time, or indeed through those more traditional parts of the school day, whether it's your enrichment opportunities or through your high quality physical education experience. So what does this look like in reality? And this is where I just wanted to bring forward the work that's been going on at Oasis Blakenhale, a school that I met back in 2018 through Claire Hoods-Truman, who's the head teacher at Oasis Blakenhale in one of the most deprived wards in Birmingham. At the time when I met Claire, she'd just taken over the junior school, and she was experiencing a situation where there were violent outbursts, there was a lack of regulation in children emotionally, there were in some cases being quite violent towards each other and towards staff, and in one particular case where they were throwing tables and chairs. But more broadly around the culture of the school, there was a lack of parent trust and engagement, And these poor behavioural situations, particularly in social situations like break times, we're seeing that they were, they were looking to have to exclude a high proportion, a higher than average proportion of Key Stage 2 pupils at the time. And they were also, critically for our role in education in terms of the results and achievement that we were looking for children to attain in the bottom 5%, and at the time were judged as inadequate. So they felt that they needed to take a completely different approach, and as I've just described, some of that was what happens in the lunchtime and break time environment, but more broadly throughout the day. And if you were to take one of Claire's direct quotes at the time, she basically assumed, or came to the assumption, that she needed to do everything that she could to help children release that energy and that pent-up frustration and anger. And so they actually introduced HIT classes. They open their school gates at 8:10 every morning, and those sessions include not only pupils but also parents and staff at the same time. And they've sort of started to build out this whole school approach to movement throughout the school day, based on young people voicing what they want from those activities, but also leading them and developing them themselves at the same time. And where's that led to? So we now have Oasis Blakenhale that was judged as a good school with outstanding elements in January of last year, where staff are retained and happy and engaged in teaching and learning. And as you can see there from things like their behaviour data, their exclusions data and their behavioural incidents, that's been hugely reduced over time, with 95% of Key Stage 2 pupils saying that they now enjoy their lunchtimes and their experience of being at school. So just finally, just from me, I wanted to build out some 10 top tips for you to take away for active lunchtimes. And I'm not going to go through these in huge amounts of detail. This is all information that can be found on the Opal website, and I'll put the link in the chat afterwards. But there's a couple of really important elements to pick up on here. One is that it's really, really important that we step aside as adults and let children get onto it. Some of the best ways in which children can engage with play and physical activity and develop physically, socially, emotionally and cognitively is for them to have uninstigated play and opportunities to move. And more often than not, the power of having peers being able to lead and activate those moments of play and physical activity are really, really important. But sometimes it's not rocket science. You don't need loads of expensive equipment and loads of expensive spaces for people to play and for them to move. It's equally how you maximise the space and the opportunities for children to play and move within what you currently have. So I think that's it for me, June. I'm very conscious of time and for Manny to have his opportunity to speak, so I'll stop sharing there and hand over.
Thank you, Chris. You've kept beautifully to time. That's exemplary. Well done. I love that list there. Well, both those lists actually. You had the list of ideas from Blakenhale, of all the things that they've done, and then you had your list there at the end. And there's such an interesting challenge there, isn't there? There's a sort of philosophy around. I think a lot of our attitudes. I've just come out of primary myself. Our attitudes around risk are very interesting. We have to manage that so carefully. But then also to think of a risk from the other way around, that there's a risk of not giving children some of these freedoms or opportunities to lead and challenge. So it's very, very interesting the way that you frame that. I'd definitely love to incorporate some of those into what we share around afterwards. So that would be really fantastic. So now what I'd love to do is to invite Manny to share from a sort of a more secondary perspective of any thoughts that you've had, Manny, about your experiences of leading schools and what lunchtimes mean for you. So over to you, please, Manny. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, not nice to meet you all. Can you hear me okay? Brilliant.
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm Manny Botwe. I'm head teacher at Tytherington School. We're an 11 to 18 comprehensive in Macclesfield. We've got roughly 1,450 students, and it's a genuine kind of range of youngsters that sort of come to the school. June, I think it was you that dropped me an email asking us to run a survey on lunchtime behaviour, and as school leaders will know, whenever you launch a survey and then when you open it, you are quite nervous and your heart sinks. But it was really, really useful. We used the survey and it sparked a lot of discussion within SLT. So the sorts of questions that were asked of students is, and we set it to our year 7s and 8s, was around the enjoyment and safety, how they spent their lunchtime, school meals, whether they felt they had enough time to eat, friendship, their views of behaviour, their views of lunchtime, their views of lunchtime length, even better ifs, and some interesting themes that won't be a surprise to you. The sort of holy trinity of behaviour, toilets and food were sort of things that sort of emerged for us. I mean, some of the main takeaways when we kind of analysed the sort of key themes that were coming up, the majority of students, we were pleased to say, felt that they felt safe and enjoyed lunchtimes. There was a marked difference actually though between the year 7s and year 8s, and part of that is that in our school the year 7s have a designated lunchtime area. They also have a designated toilet area. So I think that kind of explained some of the quite significant differences in terms of their experiences. The key areas for development for us were toilet, food quantity and lunchtime clubs. Now, I guess there's a bit of a context around that. So similar to a lot of secondary schools, over time, our lunchtime has reduced in length. So our lunchtime kicks off at about 1:25 and finishes just before 2:05. And I'm conscious that, for many students, if they've been told that they shouldn't be using the loo during lesson times, then actually, for some students, they're sprinting to use the toilets. There's often queues, or they might be sprinting to the lunch queues, often large queues. So the common complaint that we got, and my daughter is a year 8 student, not at this school, but in a school that's relatively close. And she's saying the same thing, that, there's often queuing for toilets, particularly for girls, that at times, and I know this is about lunchtime, but we also kind of asked about break time as well. The food queuing was a real significant issue. And because we have adjusted our lunchtime length, there were a lot of students who are saying that they don't take part in lunchtime clubs. And if they're getting a bus home after school, or if it's particularly dark, they feel that they miss out on that opportunity. Students said they wanted to do more at lunchtime, especially outdoors and especially in creative and sporty clubs. Now that's really interesting, because one of the things that we have at our school, we're very lucky to have a large astroturf, which is filled with hundreds of predominantly boys during lunchtime. And I'll come to that bit in a second. But it was interesting that there's a number of people who are saying that they want different types of sporting offers and different types of opportunities. People wanted a greater variety. They wanted more time to eat was a big thing. So there's a noticeable minority of children who were saying that they would like to sit down and eat, but because of a variety of factors, mainly space, but also time at lunchtime, they didn't feel like they were able to. And I have to say, personally, when I'm on duty, we have relatively good food that's served at the school, I would say, but actually it's quite hard to consume on the go. So there are times on duty where my kind of fluorescent vest is covered with kind of barbecue sauce and various bits and bobs, because it's a genuine challenge. I honestly think it's the cutlery, trying to eat spicy wings with kind of very small knife and fork is not easily achieved. Students felt that behaviour was overall pretty good, but there were particular areas where they would say they felt unsafe or they felt chaotic. So we're not immune to the issue, and this This is particularly at the end of the day where I would say, you know, toilets in particular areas don't always feel safe for youngsters. Students talked a lot about the social values of lunchtime. So they talked about, that was by far and away the thing that they loved the most about lunch, is that it was an opportunity for friendship, an opportunity for connection. And they really liked that. That was what they talked about a great deal. But it was really interesting when they talked about their suggestions for making lunchtime better. One was a greater offer of wider curricular activities. One was around a girls only option for football. One was around different types of sporting offers, and others were around the use of quiet spaces. So there were students who were saying, you know, they would welcome quiet spaces areas to game and to use phones. Now, we don't permit the use of phones in school. We're not unusual in that sense. But it was interesting, this idea of kind of wanting to have kind of individual or quiet spaces. In terms of the next steps for us, in terms of the kind of things that it sparked for us, and I think my kind of view of this is kind of somewhat, you know, when you have your own children go through secondary school, you're kind of slightly heightened to certain things and certain inequalities. We want to dig deeper in terms of the different experiences for boys and girls. I think there is something in kind of how space is used, but also quite a bit in terms of access to sport, in particular. So my daughter plays quite a lot of sport at the weekends, quite a lot of football, but she never plays football at school. You know, and the after school club is not a critique of the school, by the way. So if you're watching from the school, it's a great school. We love it. You know, but they're more likely to have their games cancelled anyway. So actually, you know, playing sport in school, particularly with the reluctance of some parents to let their children use after school clubs when it gets to autumn, I think that feels like a really pressing issue in terms of equal access to sport. So we want to do some digging around kind of boys and girls. We want to do some digging into the experience of students with special educational needs and how they experience school. We weren't able to kind of drill down into the data there, but we suspect that anxiety around use of toilets and queuing and access to different types of activities is probably more acute for those groups of students. We have an unusually high number of students with VHCPs in the school, so it's 82. We don't have a resource provision, and a number of those students would probably find kind of social time a real sort of challenge. And we're revisiting the idea of maybe potentially lengthening lunchtime. Now, there's pros and cons. You know, I know that for my behaviour deputy, you know, it's a slight sense of alarm when there's that suggestion there. But I do think in terms of wider curricular provision, a rest during the day for staff, more time to use toilets and lunch, I think there's probably an argument there. But I'm conscious that, you know, we invest quite a bit of money in terms of supervision of our lunch times, you know, so there's paid staff who are out there, which makes a difference. But in the current financial environment, that's really, really difficult to do. So I realise I might have rambled there, but they were kind of my kind of initial observations from the survey that we did. More than happy to take any kind of questions on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Manny. You've given us so much to think about. You've covered such a lot of different areas there. The first thing I want to say is, you know, well done for doing a survey, because that in itself, as you mentioned, it's quite a thing, isn't it? To put yourself out there, to ask these questions, to invite that feedback. And there's you know, it's hard sometimes, and to ask the pupils their opinion about it and maybe hear things that might be challenging to implement. And we know it's such challenging times for schools. You mentioned the resourcing there, it depends a lot on the space available, but there's so much to dig into of what you were talking about. I'll open it up to anyone else. I've got various questions, but let's see. Do other people have things that they would like to ask Chris or to ask Manny? And also, there might be people who have come to join us this afternoon who've actually got something they'd be happy to share of what's been working for them. So I'd love it if anyone would like to raise a hand, and I will come to you, or if I'm not seeing you, unmute. We'd love to hear from any questions. Yes, Karen, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, hi, I'm Karen. I work at Teacher Tapp, so this might not be the most useful question, but I'm intrigued by, when we ask one set of questions, it always leads to another set. I wondered what you thought about the uniform, whether, particularly what you were saying, Manny, about kind of girls not participating, whether that might be related to uniform, and also the chicken wings. Everyone has to wear white shirts normally in schools. It's not the best colour, and whether that might be something that you look into, that particularly with the law changes around what you need to do with uniform, whether that might be something that plays into all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to kind of, what's the phrase, mansplain or anything like that. So I'm only going to talk about kind of the perspective of the daughters and the youngsters I talk to in my school. So I don't want to teach people to kind of suck eggs or anything. But if I think about the experience of my own daughter, this comes from a position of sport has given a lot to me. Therefore, I'm always really keen. I've always been really keen for my children to engage in sport. But I noticed that, that sense of being more and more self-conscious about sport, about physical appearance, even things like let's go out onto the kind of the green and just practice some skills. My younger daughter absolutely loves it. The older one doesn't want to be seen dead with me. So I think there are some kind of elements there. But in terms of, there's been some really interesting work that's done at primary school and about how play spaces are used. And, I really do think that if we want to take seriously the idea of kind of equal access to sport, and many of the things that Chris talked about in terms of, the benefits of being out, that this issue of kind of equal access to play spaces is really important. I saw a really interesting bit of research when, that they kind of, as an experiment, halved the playing area and said, right, the boys have to play there, the girls have to play there. And when they had actually looked at play spaces, boys had taken up more space anyway, but that kind of feeling of kind of major injustice around that was really quite interesting. And I just feel that certainly from our concept, we need to give greater thought to the different sort of diet that's on offer, something for everybody. You might be that, you might be a student who wants quiet space, and we haven't given that enough thought. So for me, the next steps is digging down and being a bit more granular about different types of students and what they might want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, can I just come in there, Manny, because I think you made a couple of really great points. The first is really happy to help you with the work we're doing on equal access for girls. I think we create an environment for girls which is in favour of boys when it comes to being active and engaging with sport, and so I think there's something systemic that we need to do. My second point, just on Manny's point about how certain pupils engage with space and with activities, is we need to do far more to understand that whole piece about how children are physically regulated. And it goes back to that point about risk. Children that haven't experienced play as we might have done in childhood, who haven't hung upside down in trees and gone on roundabouts and set fire to bushes with a magnifying glass and all of those things, are coming into your schools with their vestibular system out of whack. They're in permanent sort of fight or flight mode, and they are not able to physically engage. And so there's many children that are presenting themselves with with ADHD or with autistic traits that aren't actually autistic or ADHD. They're just not being able to cope with noise and all of these things going on. So there's 3 simple things I think we can do. First is, taking Manny's point, is zone your areas. There's some great work done by Nike back in the 2000s called Nike Zone Park, which is where you have social areas, rescue areas, ball game areas, and individual challenge areas. Something really simply that you can do. The second is, as I reiterated before, let the children play. You've asked them what they want, now let them do it. That might reduce your wage bill, Manny. You don't need to have lots of adults intervening. And the third, I think, most critically, is just making sure that you've got a sense of how this is actually helping improve the day job. Every school that we work with, every Wells school that we work with, some have gone from requires improvement to outstanding. They've gone from bottom 5 to top 5% attainment, primary, secondary, special, PRU, and it's all because they've got this balance between academic outcomes and how you help kids be happy and thrive. And somewhere in the middle is the magic stuff of kids moving and playing and just being active together.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. I can see a couple of questions. Nabila, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi. Yeah, so in our school at the moment, we've still got staggered lunches. We're primary school. And so since COVID, basically, we've had these staggered lunches where only each year group goes out at a time. There's a little bit of an overlap, but not much. And then they come in 10 minutes before they go in for their lunch. So they go in for their lunch and then they go and sit in their classroom and read. And then it's like then it's the afternoon period, or it rotates around. So some classes start inside first for 10 minutes, then they go out, or they have their lunch first and then they go out and then they come back in. And I know that when I run the school council as well in my school, and I know we're trying to, like the children don't like that. And I think some of us teachers are not so in favour of it now because it's been here for a while. And we can't run lunchtime clubs. We used to have a football league that was inclusive of all the children as well prior to COVID. And we can't run that because everyone's lunches are all different times. I don't know if there's any ideas or tips of how we can make it better with the staggered lunches, or if you've got any evidence that I can share with my SLT, perhaps to say, look, can we maybe think about this in the future? Yeah.
Great question, Nabila. And I think we've asked on Teacher Tapp about split lunches and staggered lunches, and I think your experience might be quite common. Chris, did you want to jump in on that one at all? It's probably
I'm in no position to start talking about how to rearrange your timetable, Nabila, but I suppose my point of reference with all of this post-COVID is the recovery curriculum from Professor Barry Carpenter. And one of the most important things that helped children recover was social connection. They needed to come back into school, and I don't believe that we've actually through any of these challenges for many children, is that they're still lacking that social connection and the opportunity to engage, whether it's playing or moving with each other, but just socially engaging with each other at those times. It's far more crucial, I believe, particularly in the digital age. I don't know if anybody saw the Gareth Southgate lecture last week. In a digital age, it's more crucial than ever, I believe, for their well-being. We are human beings and we need to be together. And if I understand why you've maybe retained that structure for your day, but every ounce of evidence that I've read will point back to not just helping the kids be happy, but also how it's going to help you as a school.
Okay, thank you.
So some encouragement, not necessarily an answer, Nabila, but definitely some interesting encouragement there. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Juliet, I can see that you've got a hand raised. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hi, June. Just a question really for Chris again. We're working as a primary school at the moment on quite a big playtime improvement project, following our latest or last Ofsted inspection that we had. And there were definite observations about the kind of girls, boys, male dominance, etc. But looking at the OASIS case study and some of the approaches there, they're all quite sort of tangible things that they've introduced and talked about. Was there, I'm sure there was, but you know, in terms of kind of school culture and attitudes and culture that sort of underpin those playtime and playground behaviours, is there much, have you got many words of wisdom when it comes to that aspect? Because it's all very well, isn't it, sort of buying more bricks and putting more clubs on, but it's developing and thinking about those playtime cultures and that whole culture within your playground. Was there much, like I say, I'm sure there was when it came to OASIS, but is there much that you can share about,
of course,
those underpinning thoughts?
I think there's two leading principles, Juliet, one which I've touched on before. One is pupil voice, is get them to design it, and in that design, code of conduct. You know, what we're not saying here is that it's just a free for all and all of a sudden it's WWE on a concrete base. So there's a code of conduct that's, you know, what they want that environment to be, what they want to feel like when they're in that environment, and the rules and regulations that go along with that is designed with the children or by the children. And then the second is that it's led by the children. So this whole point about adult intervention, I always talk about school leaders being courageous when they do this, you know, because it probably feels quite unnerving. It's like when we say in the early years, you know, take all the chairs away and and just let the kids play and roam free. It's the natural instinct will be for the children to set the rules, set the climate, set the risks as well as the repercussions of things going wrong. And I know that feels quite unnerving, Juliet, but that's probably the two biggest things that they did. Is they literally had children throwing chairs at each other, and therefore you have to throw it back to them and go, well, if, you know, is this what you want to do coming to school? You know, do you want the parents coming in and being called in and being told off or potentially being excluded? And I think they get it. I think they get it when it's put in front of them in that way. So co-design, pupil voice, really, really important.
Thank you, Chris. I feel like that was an excellent question, Juliet, to get us to think about that. One of the things I really enjoyed doing a few schools back when I was in primary was training up the year fives as peer mediators and having them running the playground. And they absolutely rose to the challenge and loved it and really owned it. And I didn't have to pay them. So there's a tip.
Sorry, June, just really quick.
Yes.
I suppose it doesn't have to be expensive either. We were really privileged to go and work with Southport Learning Trust after the atrocities last summer, and the girls' school, high school girls' school, right on the edge of Royal Birkdale Golf Course, is in their trust, and the way in which they wanted to almost sort of recover some sort of control over their lives, both in school and in the community, was they wanted to play. And so the girls, 14, 15, 16-year-old girls, requested, you know, just access to the fields. Can we have tyres and logs and things that were readily available? It didn't require really expensive piece of equipment. I thought that was quite telling in terms of sort of the basic needs of our children at the moment.
Yeah, very good point. Very interesting. I see that we are at 4:30, and I know everyone has very busy lives and schedules out there. So I think it would be appropriate to draw it to a close and say a huge thank you to Chris and Manny for sharing with us this afternoon. Thank you for everyone else for coming along, for your questions, your engagement. We're excited about, as I said, gathering all these pupil voice surveys together and seeing what we can say about them. We will share around with you notes from today as well. So thank you very, very much. And we hope to see you again soon at future webinars.